All right, so welcome back. I have the pleasure of introducing to you Rick Hamilton. He is the CTO and Managing Director of Focused Ultrasound Foundation. He holds, or he's named on more of 1,000 patents, which I find super impressive. I'm really glad to have him here and talk about the innovation about innovation in the age of artificial intelligence. I think this is very relevant to our topic of developing search and AI. Online folks, please ask your questions while he's speaking in the Zoom chat, and I will read them out later. All right, so please welcome Rick.
Great, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Everything good? Well, it is wonderful to be here. I've known the folks from Open Source Connections now for, I don't know, pushing toward 20 years, so always very supportive of them and the community that is around Haystack as well. As was said, I'm Rick Hamilton. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Focused Ultrasound Foundation. If you're not familiar with us, look us up online, doing a lot of great work to improve patient outcomes. I have had the honor of working with AI, and I'm going to say machine learning, for about the last decade, beginning with IBM, and now very excited to be developing and deploying generative AI solutions. I've also had the opportunity to work with innovation programs at IBM and then to lead an enterprise-wide innovation program for United Health Group. So today, we're going to bring together two of my favorite subjects, innovation and AI ML. And look, I'm not going to be able to teach you anything about vector stores. I think there's a lot of potential here for reverse mentoring around search that you folks can teach me tonight, and I'm looking forward to that. But I was asked to kind of maybe take the level of conversation up to an abstract plane to say, how is AI going to impact the future of innovation? And specifically, are there things that we can do to become more innovative? So I'm excited to share some of these perspectives with you. So put on your seatbelts. So let's dive in with a little bit of a level set here on what we mean by innovation. I think if we ask everybody in this room, what is innovation, or everybody on this conference, what is innovation, you're going to get 250 different answers. And they're all going to be pretty similar. But for me, it's kind of like Justice Potter Stewart back in 1964. When asked to describe obscenity, he said, well, I don't really know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it. We know innovation when we see it, okay? But a more poetic answer was from Dr. Sujit Georgi, when he said, innovation is seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody else has thought. I tend to think of innovation as really applied creativity. And that's, these innovations are these changes in human behavior that drive progress, improve the quality of life, create new jobs, new industries. And, as technologists, it's very easy for us to think about tech innovation, but the reality is you have business innovation, you have innovation in policy and governance and other areas as well. So hopefully today the topics we're discussing are relevant not just to technology, but across a big gamut. So let me throw a statistic out that I saw about a month ago that has me a little bit concerned. There was a Pew Research poll that came out in February that asked people how they felt about AI in the workplace. And 52%, just over half, said they are concerned about the impact of AI on jobs in the workplace. Only 6% of respondents said that they feel that AI is going to create more job opportunities for them in the future. So this is pretty scary. This is pretty frightening, and we in technology are on the front lines of this. What we are experiencing today, particularly in software development, is going to be sweeping through all other industries as well. And so the question becomes, how do we prepare for this age, for this new pervasive AI that's going to be all around us? The truth is that we need to be as innovative as we possibly can. And so that is the focus of what we want to discuss today. So since we've level set on what we mean by innovation, let's also do a quick level set on AI. And I've got to tell you something, folks. I'm going to be candid here. I hate the term artificial intelligence. Okay? For years, I've resisted saying it. Now I think I'm being subsumed into the AI world. But it was Arthur C. Clarke in 1962 in a book, Profiles of the Future, wrote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, guess what? When some new technology comes out that strikes us as magic, we tend to call it AI. but after a few years, it gets a proper name and it just goes back into the background of our lives, and we stop calling it AI. But you know, look, we'll talk about AI in these broad contexts, but when I talk about AI today, I'm particularly talking about deep learning and particularly generative AI. But let's take a brief and fun little tour through AI. There's different places we could start, but I'm going to start with Alan Turing. Many of you know he was a brilliant English mathematician who headed up the program at Bletchley Park during World War II to break the code of the Enigma, which was a Nazi coding system. Through his work, he saved many, many lives and helped the Allies win the war. But he went on after the war to do things that maybe made him more famous. In 1950, he published a paper describing what he called as the imitation game. Now, in the imitation game, in its original form, he described a human judge interacting with both a human and a computer, say on a teletype interface. And if the human judge cannot tell the difference between the two, then that machine could be said to be intelligent. So his insight, Alan Turing's insight, was that we don't judge machine intelligence by some sort of sentience. We don't judge it by an architecture. We judge it by its performance, by its behavior. And the fact is that today we commonly use the Turing test. If you do a CAPTCHA to get into a website, you're also paying homage to the legacy of Alan Turing. So that was 1950. Fast forward 6 years, we've got the Dartmouth Workshop, more formally known as the Dartmouth Summer Project on Artificial Intelligence, which coincidentally was the first ever publicized use of the term artificial intelligence, AI. And it had all these brilliant minds of the time coming to Dartmouth, people like Marvin Minsky and Claude Shannon. And so the truth is they had all these brilliant people talking about AI and what it meant for machines to be intelligent. But the conference really had a mixed legacy. On one hand, it's kind of cool to have all these brilliant people there. On the other hand, coming out of the conference, people had incredibly high expectations. You know, they thought that human level intelligence was maybe a decade away. And so you've got all the pop culture suddenly becomes Robbie the Robot and the Jetsons and all these things, which guess what? That led to disappointment and what we commonly call the AI winters. And so the AI winters happened throughout much of the 60s and 70s and late 80s. And these were times when companies and governments stopped funding AI. They said, this is ridiculous. We're never going to build human level intelligence in a machine. There were a few little thaws, particularly in the early 80s with something called expert systems. For those of you not familiar with expert systems, this was an attempt to code everything that you can possibly imagine into a system. So imagine trying to hard code conversational chatbots, right? This thing is not going to work for anything. What was quickly realized was that they had very limited applications. And there was one high-profile system called MyCin, M-Y-C-I-N, developed at Stanford, which was trying to diagnose patients. The problem was MyCin kept misdiagnosing patients, and it really missed a lot of the long-tail conditions. And so we had people misdiagnosed, getting the wrong prescriptions, and ultimately we've realized that expert systems were really only useful for narrow ranges of problems with a very finite set of solutions. So all this led to, you know, the AI winter in the late 80s, but then there was a tiny little bubble of activity. There was a little thaw in the frozen stream, and this was something that was kept alive by a handful of people throughout the 90s and into the 2000s. Those people are now household names and Nobel Prize winners, and this was the use of artificial neural networks with deep learning. Now, the concept of artificial neural networks have been around since the 50s. In fact, the first ANN was called the perceptron back in 1957. But the problem is these things would not scale. I mean, you could describe them intellectually, but you couldn't really build them. And so several things happened in the late 90s into the aughts, the early 2000s, to make these possible. One was hardware. So there was a company that was founded to accelerate graphics functions for gamers. And they kind of limped along for a while, not really sure if they were going to make it or not. But of course, we know today that NVIDIA actually made it because people figured out that these GPUs had great capability of matrix manipulation. and we're really much better at training these artificial neural networks than other processors. So the hardware got better. Secondly, the software got better. In software architecture, we began commonly using gradient descent and backpropagation, and all the techniques and tools that were developed over time became commonly adapted. So you have much better hardware and much better software. The third element that led to the rise of deep learning as a big phenomenon, of course, was data. You had data explosions on the internet, which you're very, very familiar with. So with this combination of hardware, software, and data, we suddenly had deep learning performing the way we'd always hoped. But on top of that, in 2017, a bunch of Googlers published a paper called Attention is All You Need. In this, they described the new architectural concept of the transformer, which replaced recurrent neural networks and long short-term memory architectures. And today, of course, when we work with generative AI, we're primarily working with transformer-based architectures. So enough of that introduction. We know what innovation is. We know what AI is. How do we start bringing these two together? Well, I'm here today to tell you that AI is going to help innovation. It's going to hinder innovation. And then there's a bunch of wildcards that we got to keep our eye on and figure out. So let's kind of walk through each of these. And I'm going to try to make this as exciting as possible. The good news is the lights are very bright up here. So if your eyes are shut, I can't tell. So I'll have to listen for the snoring. But let's kind of dive in. I mean, at its most fundamental level, first of all, this was a new concept 8 years ago. Now it's old news. But AI is a general purpose technology, right? You don't walk into a business and say, hey, what's your electrical strategy? You simply figure any business is using electricity to accomplish the goals. Similarly, AI/ML is a general purpose technology that can be used in every part of our organization. I would also tell you that at its most fundamental level, AI will help innovation by reducing the human toil, the human mental toil, to get to a state where human imagination and creativity is possible. So let's get a little bit more deep into this. First of all, the thing that AI really excels at, and particularly generative AI, is this concept of rapid data analysis and pattern recognition. It is able to find patterns in data that humans are more and more likely to miss, particularly with very large data sets. So, I mean, the best example of this is a few years old now, but when the computer from DeepMind called AlphaFold came out, suddenly, for the first time, you had machines able to predict the folding of an amino acid sequence into a three-dimensional protein shape. Why is this important? Well, because people interested in drug design had for decades been trying to figure out how amino acids fold up into protein shapes. And in order to figure this out empirically, it took years of laboratory work. And that was just for one single transformation from amino acid to protein. Now suddenly we've got systems that can figure out the shapes in a matter of hours. And so that allows us to actually innovate based on top of these findings. Many, many examples here, but again, I think we all recognize the ability of AI to find patterns and to help with data analysis. A second way is through enhanced design and simulation. Now, AI is able to help us design systems in ways that may not be intuitive to human designers. It also helps us, in fact, simulate these designs in real-world scenarios. A case in point would be Airbus used generative AI to redesign a number of the structures internal to their aircraft so that they're lighter weight while maintaining the same physical integrity. This helps with fuel efficiency, and this helps save money for their customers. So these are the kind of things that we can now model. But I would also say that the simulation abilities allow us to get to a finished product with fewer prototypes and fewer real-world iterations. Now, for those of you who have been around for a while, I noticed that when Renee introduced me, he said something about been working with AI for a long time. That's a synonym for old, right? So, but for those who are around in the 90s, there was a lot of buzz around genetic algorithms. And you might say, well, how is this different than genetic algorithms? Well, GAs required human definition of a fitness function. They required humans to say, here's what success is. Now, AI can define success based upon real-world conditions. Also, genetic algorithms would randomly iterate, just like evolutionary mutations. They would randomly iterate, which maybe got better or got worse, whereas today we have something that converges relatively quickly on an optimized solution. So we're seeing a much greater performance in terms of efficiency and effectiveness than we saw with genetic algorithms. A third area I don't even want to talk about here. You folks know this inside and out, but these tools are great for intelligent knowledge management. I was amazed, however, when I saw how most people use generative AI. And the kind of searches are things like, tell me about Gene Hackman, or what is Katy Perry's middle name? And I'm not sure that the business models for training these massive foundation models really hold true if that's our use of generative AI. The fact is that these capabilities are getting very, very impressive, particularly the deep research capabilities now being put forth by all these large companies. And I use them daily to draw and synthesize reports and synthesize information from, and sometimes dozens of websites. But again, a conversation that we'll come back to a little bit later. Another great use for these to fuel creativity, to fuel innovation, is around idea exploration. I'll tell you something. I always need help in looking smart. And generative AI helps me look smart. So I really appreciate that about it. 2 years ago, I was moderating a panel on the use of AI in medical devices. And it was particularly with a focus on regulatory matters. And so I had about a half dozen ideas that I thought, well, I can ask my panel about these half dozen topics. And I go out to Claude, I go out to ChatGPT, I go out to Perplexity, and suddenly I've got 15 questions or 20 questions. And so I use these daily. I think we should all use these models daily to basically be an intelligent sounding board from us, because they are wonderful at idea exploration. Finally, I found great value in customized learning. And by customized learning, I don't simply mean summarize the workings of a quantum computer, although yes, I have done that. I also mean that I've used these to create lesson plans for me. For those people who claim to be lifelong learners, use these to help you figure out, how do I actually learn? I've used these to create tests. I've used these to create labs for others as well. There's a lot of great different things that we can do along each of these spaces. So, in quick summary, again, I'm going to say that AI shifts our focus from these rote and repetitive tasks and allow us to apply human ingenuity on higher matters. This has a lot of positives. It also has some negatives, which we'll get to in a moment. It's a very, very exciting time. So, is AI an unalloyed positive? Is it a gift from the heavens above that has no downsides? Well, you guessed it, it is not. There are a handful of risks, and these risks, folks, exist both at the individual level and at the societal level, right? And so the approach, the strategy that we can take to mitigate these is going to vary according to the risk, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So there are many things that AI will provide for us that will distract us at a personal level. Think about that person you know. I'm sure it's not you. Think about that person that you know who spends hours staring into TikTok or staring into Instagram Reels, or is otherwise consumed by these AI-generated streams of content that are delivered to them. I got some news for you. It's about to get much more compelling and much more engaging. And we are going to face individual decisions in the years ahead that basically are, am I going to spend tonight working on that online class to grow my skills, or am I going to play this AI-powered game that I've immersed myself in for 62 hours already this week? It's going to be, am I going to practice that musical instrument, or am I going to engage with my AI? So There will be many people that find the challenge of consumption of entertainment too hard to overcome. This is going to be something that we're going to have to contend with. It's going to be increasingly addictive in the coming years. Secondly, at both a personal and societal level, we have huge threats to innovation because these tools can create echo chambers and bubble perspectives. We will live awash in confirmation bias if we are not careful. So this has impacted a couple of levels. One is that it is very easy, and you've seen this already on social media, it's very easy for these tools to feed back information to us that reinforce what we already believe and make us think the other person that believes differently is stupid. And so the more information I get that tells me, Rick, you are right, and can you believe these other people? The challenge there is it's very corrosive. It's corrosive to a society, and it causes breakdown in trust, and this can hurt societal innovation. The other thing I would tell you is that in order to innovate, we need diverse perspectives. If every bit of reinforcement you get is telling you you're great, you're right, you're wonderful, you're so perfect, then guess what? There's very little incentive and there's very little grist, if you will, to innovate. And so we have to find ways to break out of this, this reinforcement bias or confirmation bias that's going to be coming at us. Skills atrophy. Let me ask a rhetorical question. When's the last time you did long division by hand? Right? For me, it's been a while. Yes, I can still do it, but for many of us, we learned to do long division as kids, and then we were handed a calculator, and we went on to learn geometry and trig and calculus. So we used these tools to apply ourselves to higher level skills. Now, today, this is all on supercharged adrenaline, if you will, because AI has the chance to offload a lot of the critical thinking skills that we normally undertake. We who are not born into an AI era recognize this, and hopefully everybody, the 250 people here in person and online, recognize what's going on and are using this to approach higher level skills or to master higher level skills. But how do we know what's going to be happening for others and for future generations? There's a very real possibility that we simply decide that ChatGPT or DeepSeek is good enough and we don't push ourselves. How many people will pursue the mental equivalent of learning calculus for critical thinking if you have these tools available to you? And we don't yet know what that's going to do to human innovation over the course of time. A fourth thing is economic disruption, and this has a couple different meanings. I think for me, the most obvious source of disruption is pretty scary, and maybe it's the elephant in the room. Given that these tools allow us to do more than we have before, I'm a big believer in Jevons paradox, that the demand for software will go up because it's all so much easier now, and we're going to see software in everything. But it's also true that a startup may need one software engineer instead of 5. The large company may need 100 software engineers instead of 1,000. So the challenge here is the hollowing out of our economic system. And by that, I mean, how do you become a senior engineer or a senior legal counsel or a principal investigator if you've never been a junior engineer or a law clerk or a lab assistant, right? And so by having these junior level roles, you are able to learn tacit knowledge pertaining to the field. You learn habits and customs of the workplace, and you advance and grow. And what happens if we no longer need quite so many people in those entry-level roles? That is something that we need societal conversation about. There's a second side of economic disruption that's not really talked about, and that is if only a few companies control these foundation models, what does that mean for innovation? Are we going to see it increasingly homogenized? Are we going to see that all innovation begins to follow certain trends and certain patterns set forth by Anthropic and OpenAI and Google? And so I think the jury is still out on that one. Something else that we should talk about are potential bias impacts. And a lot of times when we talk about bias, people think, oh, you mean malevolent, intentional discrimination. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the entrenchment of ideas as contained in the training data. So these models have a way of spitting back whatever they've seen in the training data. And if you have ideas and concepts that are outside those bounds, they may not stand the test of these models. A real simple example. I love to write. I write a lot. My writing tends to be maybe a little bit, some could say, quirky. I tend to find analogies and examples and metaphors that maybe others would not make. But when I put my writing through one of these models and ask it to improve it for readability, it invariably smooths off the rough edges and takes out my quirky sides. And so it's like a regression to the mean, a reversion to the mean. What happens if all these brilliant thinkers or quirky thinkers are now seeing their ideas smoothed out by generative AI? This could have detrimental effects on innovation as well. So again, we said there's different ways to mitigate these. In some cases, it can take governmental action. In some cases, it can take corporate action. But most importantly, it takes awareness by us. It takes us to know that this is happening and try to guard against these risks. So we've talked about the upsides. We've talked about the downsides. Let's talk about the wildcards. And when I say wildcards, these are things that we don't know how they're going to play out. But they could, in fact, have a big ability or have a big impact on our ability to use AI in innovative activities. So let's go through this very quickly. One is this question of intellectual property, and the courts are yet to decide on the fair use of printed materials, but depending on how the courts decide, it could become much more expensive to use these models. It could become these models could develop much more slowly. We don't know how that will impact the overall development of generative AI. A second area related to intellectual property that is often not considered is that today many companies will publish their innovations as patents. And a patent is basically a guaranteed monopoly on this idea for 20 years, but you've got to put it in the public domain so everybody knows how you're doing it. And that allows others to build on top of your innovations. But AI cannot be an inventor on a patent. So the question becomes, will these companies increasingly begin to say, you know what, we're going to publish fewer patents and we're going to trust more and more trade secrets? And so if that's the case, we don't really know how this can play out societally, but it's another wild card as well. More broadly, there are other regulatory matters. We all know about, say, GDPR and user privacy legislation that's in place. That'll be happening in the U.S. to varying degrees. We have other areas of regulatory policy, like ruling that could come out around deepfakes, things that could come out around explainability. If you walk into a bank and say, "I'd like to get a mortgage," and they say, "No, you can't," and I say, well, why can't I have a mortgage? And they say, the black box told me you can't. That's not really compelling now, is it? So there may be rules around these other kind of regulatory matters that we have to keep our eyes on. Business model transformation is going to be huge. Folks, over the last 2 decades, we have seen more transformation in business models than I ever imagined possible. We have seen the rise of ecosystems and platforms. We have seen direct-to-consumer. We've seen everything as a service for recurring revenue streams instead of one-time purchases. But I'm here to tell you that what we've seen over the last 20 years is nothing compared to what is coming. And what is coming over the next decade is going to be hyper-personalization of products and services. It's going to be the opening up of AI platforms. It's going to be companies beginning to become extremely, extremely lean in human staffing as they figure out how to use generative AI to maximal effect. And so you're going to have opportunities to make money over the next decade in ways that you have not had at any time in the past. Another wild card is this issue of cybersecurity and trust. And everything we've said so far about usage of these models implicitly is assuming here that you can trust these models. But there are big attack surfaces here, folks. I mean, in the training data itself, There are attack surfaces in the model itself being trained. At inference time, there are attack surfaces. We've all heard about these clear overlays you can put on a stop sign that the human eye doesn't see, but will cause a self-driving vehicle to run through the stop sign. So there's going to be whole new industries around this. But if you are unable to trust these models, then things break down very, very quickly. And that trust doesn't have to be because of malicious actors. It could also be, for instance, because of overuse of synthetic data. Now you've got all this data that doesn't really reflect real-world conditions, and you stop believing your models. So this is something else that we need to again, keep our eye on. There are other more broadly concerns around ethical factors. You know, my 20-something-year-old daughter respects AI, but she said she really hates using it because of the energy consumption, water consumption, and I get that. But my question for you becomes, what kind of pushback may happen societally in a few years? And if AI is a fundamental part of your solutions, will there be any pushback about, say, environmental concerns or human in the loop or versus human on the loop, and these other factors as well? So these are all wildcard considerations. Look, just be aware of these, keep your eye on these, because they will be impacting your ability to innovate using AI. So we've covered ups and downs, and we've covered the wildcards. I think netting out what we've talked about here is that a lot of the human intellectual toil will be automated. So look, if you go back 100 years, 150 years, the combine harvester, the weaving mill, the locomotive, they all displaced people. And folks, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There was real pain. But they allowed our great-great-great-grandparents to work less with their hands and more with their minds, and society advanced. I believe that likewise, we have an opportunity today to eliminate toil using these tools and to advance. But the reality is that if the toil, the intellectual toil, is automated, that we need to be as innovative as possible, right? We all need to be on our A game and thinking as creatively as we can possibly imagine. So the next question becomes, are there ways that we can become, in our own personal and professional life, more innovative? And speaking as an inventor on 1,063 issued US patents, and I've had the chance to work with many, many brilliant people in around 40 countries around the world, I think the answer is yes. We can become more innovative. And I also think there are 3 simple habits that we can adopt to become more innovative. And I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about these habits to help us adapt for this world that's coming. So how do we become more innovative? I think the first thing we need to do is to recognize that all innovation is a mashup. It is a remix of things that have been done before, often in other contexts, and applied to new purposes. So you take ideas learned in one area, you tweak them, you modify them, and you apply them in a new domain. And the only way to do this is to build a huge foundation of knowledge, right? It is about constantly learning. I am a firm believer, and your name was Sarah, is that right? Okay, yeah, so Sarah talked about being a lifelong learner. I am a firm believer that your success as an innovator matters less on whether you have a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD than it does in the way you spend your time tonight, the videos you watch this weekend, the podcast you listen to next week. It is about continually taking in information, because the only way to innovate is to have a broad body of knowledge. And look, something else that may be a little counterintuitive, but as you are reading, and watching videos and listening to podcasts, don't just read in your chosen area, but branch out into other contiguous and surrounding areas as well. I would also say, don't just listen to people that look like you and have the same life experiences as you. You know, I was in Kunming, China a few years ago, in Yunnan province, southwestern China. And I was there for 3 days. It's a city of around 7 million people. And the last day there, I was finished my last talk, and I was asked a question I had never been asked before. So, why are Americans so innovative? Wow, okay, why? Okay, think fast, Rick. So I said, well, you know, it's about a great higher education system. It's about access to capital. It's about a culture that tolerates risk and failure as long as we learn and grow from those failures. But, you know, I have been in Kunming, the city of 7 million people, and I had not seen another guy that looked like me since I left the airport in 3 days. And I said, it's about our diversity as well. And so take in ideas from people that have different life experiences and different ways of seeing the world, because that is the kind of influence, the kind of foundational knowledge that help you challenge your assumptions. So step 1, continually always build your foundation. Step 2, look critically at existing solutions, because within every solution, within every product, within every idea is contained the seeds of its own destruction. Now, don't go and say, well, Rick told me I should look at the bad side of everything. No, that's not what I'm saying. I am saying that finding the opportunity for innovation, in my opinion, is just as important as the innovation itself. And this is what true innovators do. They ask the question, what will people be complaining about a year from now? Let me give you an example. When I was born, there was one way to take music on the road with you, and this was this big format tape called the 8-track. And I'm sure when the 8-track came out, my parents' generation probably said, ooh, look, we have seen the future of music. But the innovators said, well, there's a problem. It takes up a lot of space, the sound quality is bad, and there's a big clunk in the middle of the song as the tape changes tracks. And so those innovators came up with the cassette tape, a much smaller format. And many people probably said, oh, look, we have seen the future of music. But the true innovators said, there's a problem. There is hiss on the tape. It stretches and the sound quality gets worse. And if you leave it on the dash of a hot car, this thing is going to melt. And so those innovators, particularly at Philips and Sony, came up with a compact disc player. And everybody, including teenage me, said, oh, look, we have seen the future of music. But the true innovators said, well, there are problems. Because now, you know, this disc can still get scratched. It takes up space. And, you know, I used to run with a Discman, which is like a Walkman, but it's like a compact disc. And I'd go running with this CD spinning around my waist and the thing skipping all over the place. So no, there were issues. And so the next generation of innovators developed and commercialized MP3 players. The first was not the iPod. The first was actually the Microsoft Zune, but that's a story for another day. And many people, when the MP3 player came out, said, oh, look, we have seen the future of music. But the innovators said, well, that's fine, but you're limited to those files on your computer, Napster notwithstanding. And so the next generation of innovators developed streaming services, things like Pandora, things like Spotify. And many people said, oh, look, we have seen the future of music. But the innovator said, but now you're limited to those artists, those musicians that you know. We need sophisticated machine learning techniques to help you find your next favorite artist. Oh, look, we have seen the future of music. And so in every one of these cases, we see that the innovators were the people that successfully said, oh, this is nice, this is great, how does it work? What can we do to build atop this? And this is the kind of continuous mentality that we each need to undertake. So step 2, look critically at existing solutions. Step 3 should not even require discussion, but it does, and that is to take action. I can't tell you what action to take, whether it's building your own company, whether it's working for an employer, whether it's doing the IP creation to create white space. But if you don't take action on your ideas, you will end up regretting that in future years. For those of you who have been around for a few decades, you know that by the time you get into your mid-40s, your friends start saying things like, you know, I could have done this. I should have done that. And when you're in your 50s, you hear it all the time. And you don't want to be one of these folks, right? I would rather step into the batter's box, swing time and time again, have a few strikeouts, but also have the chance for that solid single and that home run. And again, look, you know, I can't tell you what action to take, but at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, Rick, I got it. Once I have a great idea, I will take action. I'll act upon it. I'll do what you said. But look, I'm here to tell you that you already have a great number of ideas swirling around in your head at this moment. In the words of Linus Pauling, the only 2-time solo Nobel Prize winner, the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And so, figure out which idea are you going to capitalize on, which idea are you going to leverage, and what are you going to do with it? Because this is what you need to be doing to become more innovative, increasingly important in the years ahead. So let's try to bring this home and think about what's going to happen over the next couple of years and where is all this going to go. Let's talk about AI's future and our shared future. Well, how do we apply this concepts, these 3 steps that I just talked about to AI? Well, in terms of building the foundation and looking critically, I would tell you to use these tools constantly. And don't be one of these really wimpy vanilla users that ask ChatGPT a simple question and then walk away saying, well, that wasn't very good. I want you to push these things. I want you to run them through their paces. And I want you to develop familiarity with a wide range of models because they all have different strengths. It's about learning the models, and it's about asking yourself hard questions about how can this be improved and how can I use it to improve my existing business or technical processes as well. I believe that AI needs to be in the hands of everybody. But even if it is in the hands of everybody, the benefit we gain from AI is going to be widely varying. I'll tell you a secret, don't let it out of this room, please. But 25 years ago, I was a pretty good programmer. Today, I'm what's known technically as a crappy programmer because I don't do it that much anymore. Primarily, for years now, my programming has been nights and weekends for fun. But a few years ago, when I was doing my nights and weekend work, I always went to Stack Overflow, and it took me forever to find what I was looking for. Now, using Claude and using other techniques, other models, I have raised from being a crappy programmer to being a passable programmer. So, it helped pick me up off the floor and make me decent again. But now imagine, conversely, the master, the person who is really good already. This person begins to snap together large bodies of code like Lego bricks and is able to think more and more creative thoughts and to construct cathedrals in software. And so whereas I, the person laying on the floor, is able to stand back up again, the person who is good already has the potential to use these tools to become exceptional. And recognize this will play out again and again, not just in software, but across many different domains. I would also tell you that the nature of your work is going to change. Increasingly, you're going to be a manager. If you want to get down in the weeds, you can get down in the weeds by reviewing what your employees, these models, have done. Let me tell you some of the ways that I'm using these today. And I'm not going to go into specific, but I mentioned the deep research. I will often kick off deep research using subscription models from Gemini, from OpenAI, from Manus, which is a new Chinese model, from Perplexity, from Anthropic. I'll kick off deep research asking them all the same question. Synthesize this. Tell me about this. Give me details. I will walk into the kitchen. I'll make myself lunch. I'll come back 15 minutes later, and I'll begin to review their work. It's like I've got multiple employees now working on my behalf, and my job is to figure out who I believe and how I'm going to use their work products. So again, think of these models as being your assistants, and you increasingly are going to be a manager. Yes, you can get in the weeds if you want, but the actual weed work will be done by these models. So there's a big fundamental question, can AI innovate? Wow. I think the best answer to this that I've heard is from Demis Hassabis, who is the founder of DeepMind. And Hassabis describes AI innovation at 3 levels. And the first level is interpolation, it's averaging. And so if you have 2 cat pictures, AI can average the eyes and the fur and all these different characteristics and create a new cat that's never existed before. That's not very interesting. The second level is where things get more interesting. Hassabis talks about interpolation. And this would be where the AI is doing something which is not anticipated by us as humans because it breaks outside of our usual patterns of behavior, but it's all there in the training data. A case in point was this famous Move 37, where AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol to basically show dominance of computers over humans in the world of Go. And Move 37 was something that had never been seen in all the training data. But through the use of the training data, combined with reinforcement learning, the system figured out that this non-intuitive approach could actually have strategic advantages. So this, again, interpolation from the training data combined with reinforcement learning is the level 2. The level 3 that Hassabas asked about, which I think is a question we can discuss at Cardinal Hall tonight, is, can AI truly come up with groundbreaking innovations, the next theory of evolution, theory of gravitational pull, relativity, whatever the case may be. And there's a lot of discussion around how far the current models can be scaled and what they can do in terms of innovation. I don't profess to have a neat and tidy answer for that. My own expectation is that maybe architecturally we're not there, no matter how much you scale up, but it's going to be exciting to see what happens over the coming years. And because it's contractually obligated, anytime you talk about AI, you've got to mention AGI. So I'm going to mention AGI only from the standpoint of saying, don't worry about it. I say that because AGI is a matter of semantics. It's something that's going to be fun to talk about with your friends, over a beer after the workday. But companies are going to claim AGI. Who cares? I'm pretty confident there's not going to be a fast takeoff. It's not going to be Tuesday morning at 10:15 and suddenly the AIs all take over. Rather, we're going to see a continual growth in these models and their capabilities. And rather than worrying about AGI, other than a matter of fun semantic debate, I would say just recognize these models are going to get better and better and better, and ask yourself the question of how you can best use them and leverage them to accomplish your goals. So, closing thoughts here. In 1993, April to be exact, I downloaded some software from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and it was called the Mosaic web browser. And my mind was blown. I had been online for years, just out of grad school, but I was at the University of Texas, and I was used to using Telnet and FTP and Usenet groups and links and a bunch of other command line tools. And now suddenly, for the first time, I was seeing rich content from faraway places, and I knew everything had changed. Now, at that moment, I could not envision an Apple App Store with 2 million apps. I could not conceive of the societal and economic impact of an Amazon. I could not fathom the business model of an Uber. But all these things became possible. I would tell you that today we are similarly living in a mosaic moment. And I would tell you that incredible new opportunities are awaiting us. And the question is, who are going to find them? For you, you need to figure out how you're going to respond to this moment in time, and what are you going to do to leverage these tools to make your own professional journey fascinating and fulfilling, and how are you going to basically respond to this moment in time. So with that, I think I've used my allotted time, and I look forward to conversations tonight at Cardinal Hall.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for this excellent and inspiring talk. Do we have any questions to Rick here in the audience? There's one.
Okay, so I know you said you weren't going to talk too much about AGI, but I have to ask the question, what's your take on some of the more dystopian scenarios that have come out, especially in the last couple of weeks? There's been that AI 2027 document. Just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
So the question is about the more dystopian projections for AI. I believe that the biggest threats of AI, candidly, are the degree to which it is an asymmetrical tool. It can allow individual or small group bad actors to basically have impact that they would not be able to have today. And this can be anything from bio threats to, imagine just before an election, a deep fake of a politician saying something repugnant and throwing a few % of the vote the different way. So there are many different ways this can happen. But again, the biggest threats are around the asymmetry in the hands of bad actors. I also think that we are not prepared societally for the changes that are coming. I don't believe that governmental forces truly grasp the changes that are possible over the coming years and the influence it's going to have on professional life and the workforce in America. I mean, I was at an Intel Venture Capital Conference in California in 2015, and I heard the head of Google self-driving that would become Waymo say, oh, by the year 2020, the only problems left in self-driving vehicles will be regulatory. It won't be any more technical challenges. So we see how that played out. But if we did, in fact, master self-driving vehicles, then there are 6 million people in America that make their living driving vehicles. What happens to 6 million people? So we need to be having a lot more conversations around these topics. In terms of the AI overlords, I think that's just about as likely as my AI peeling my grapes for me tonight with dinner. So I'm not worried about these more fantastical scenarios. Other questions?
Yeah, thanks for the interesting talk. One big problem is that there are very few of us, very few Americans, who understand any of this. And I'm seeing more and more people not learning critical thinking. So if, as you say, people are managing these tools, which I think is a great metaphor, who's going to be learning how to manage them effectively? When move, whatever it was, 37 or whatever, is actually a bug and not a brilliant move, who's going to figure that out?
Well, so great question, and I believe this can be answered at a couple different levels. So like move 37, is it a bug or is it a brilliant strategic play? That will be borne out by the end results, right? And we can also say what happens when we begin to put increasing AI in military scenarios, and the AI decides, okay, we're going to sacrifice these human lives to make a bigger gain. I mean, there's some very wild scenarios you can certainly imagine. But I've heard a lot about Dario Amodi and others saying, should people still learn how to code? And I think the answer is yes, because several things. One, coding is great for teaching critical thinking and for teaching how to think in structured fashion. But also, look, we do not want these systems to be creating huge bodies of code that are never reviewed by human eyes. I mean, ultimately, we need human oversight. And you can say, yes, well, the oversight will become increasingly automated. But at a certain point, we become like the Roman Empire, where past generations built advanced plumbing and their great-grandchildren forgot how to do it. And we don't want to become that. We cannot afford to lose those critical skills. And this means we continue to train ourselves in these basics, we continue to apply critical thought, and then we manage these the same way we would manage employees.
But how does this happen?
Okay, I think we have to come to an end. Sorry, Stavros. Let's go. Let's.
I will be there at dinner tonight, and I'd love to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Rick will be around tonight. So thank you very much again, and thank you all for joining us.